Right, I am hoping that that has gone live. The recording has started. I've started the webinar. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Angling Trust Club and Fisheries Support webinar. This is going to take place over the next sort of hour and a half. We're covering health and safety for work parties, projects, health and safety for work parties and projects. If somebody could just drop, any of the participants could just drop in the Q&A that you can hear us okay, everything is working fine, and the event has started, and you're getting audio and video. There's a comment straight away. Yep, loud and clear. That's terrific. Great. So we are up and running and live. Thanks very much. And you can see me, Mark Edgerton, on the screen. Yep. So Club and Fisheries Support Officer, my name is Mark Edgerton. I cover the Midlands region. Very pleased to be joined tonight by Paul Coulson, Chief Executive of the Institute for Fisheries Management, and Mark Owen, who's the Head of Fisheries at the Angling Trust. Firstly, I'm going to hand over to Paul. He's got a slide presentation for us and a great deal of useful information that you will find very helpful going forward with your projects and work parties. After that presentation, we'll then go through a few Q&As. Some of the questions and answers may be answered live as you pop them up in the Q&A box. And then we'll do our best to clear some of those as well during a short stint before Mark takes over with his presentation, and then after that, any Q&As that are left, we'll clear them up at the end of the event. Anything that's particularly drawn out or complicated, perhaps save that for an email, and email me directly at mark.edgerton@anglingtrust.net, and I can then find the answer within the Angling Trust through Mark or Paul and others, and come back to you in due course. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Paul Coulson, Chief Executive, Institute of Fisheries Management, for his slide presentation, and he'll now share his screen. Over to you, Paul.
Nice one. Cheers, Mark. Evening, everyone. Yeah, thank you all for coming this evening. Really appreciate it. So as Mark says, my name is Paul Coulson. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Fisheries Management, and the Institute is a members organisation. We represent fisheries professionals across all fields. We're a very broad church, and we've got membership right through from student level through to sort of senior level within groups like the Environment Agency, the Angling Trust, and academics and what have you. And one of the key services we offer is to deliver training and speak at workshops, and we often work with the Angling Trust and the Environment Agency, and I'm sure some of you will have been to some of our workshops in the past as well that we run on a weekend throughout the winter. So yeah, today I'm just going to share a little bit of information around managing safety really at work parties and fisheries operations. And I appreciate it's work party season, isn't it, at the moment? And I'm sure you've all got some very well-meaning volunteers and individuals out there who will come and give you a hand. So what I've done is I've pulled together some of the sort of key features that we regularly see, or the key issues we regularly see or come across when looking at work parties, and it's really just to pass on that information to yourselves, give you that little bit of background and that bit of information around working safely on your fisheries, particularly around work parties, and to get you thinking about how you're going to operate with your volunteers as you move through both this winter and the incoming sort of work party seasons. So, bit of background, really. We are just going to start at the beginning. So we'll just have a couple of slides about planning, what we do and how we go about it, and getting the most from our work parties and our volunteers. We're going to have a little look at just a couple of pieces of that sort of health and safety law, again, just to get you thinking about how it relates to you and your activities within your fisheries. Then we'll come on to risk assessments. I'm sure a number of you do risk assessments as part of your day job, so that'll it'll just be a refresher and just a really those key points to think about when you're looking at risk assessments. what you're going to look for on site. Some of that PPE you might want to have on site for our volunteers, make everybody safe, and some other bits and pieces we go through that as well. So really, just before you kick off, the important thing is, you're working with your members. They might be on your angling club, or they might be your season ticket holders, whatever it might be. So we need to really have a think before we start with these white parties. People are giving up their time. They're coming out often on a weekend, in a winter, in the cold and the wet and the snow and the ice and everything else. And so we need to understand. They need to have an understanding of what they want to achieve. So you need to have that plan of what do you want to achieve over that day or over the weekend, or when it might be. Don't wing it. If you want some people to work with you, have some plans drawn up here. Simple things about how you want to design a platform for angling, or how you want the margins to look, or where you want to put the plants, or where you want to, what tree branches you maybe want to remove, where you're going to have your habitat, your brash piles and things like that. So you've got clear plans of work. And then work within your limitations. I know everybody says, "Oh yeah, I'll be there on Sunday. I'll be there on Sunday," and then it's as we've just had last weekend, it's -5, it's thick snow, and it's ice, and people suddenly have better options of staying in bed, or there's the football's on, or whatever it might be, or the fan going shopping is more is a better option than going standing up to the waist in the water and breaking the ice. So think about that and how many volunteers you've got, and then another thing as well, that you've got to be very honest with yourself about how competent, fit, keen, and importantly, how sensible are they? Everybody's well-meaning, everybody wants to come and help, but you've really got to think about that. If you've got a two ends of the spectrum. If you've got really young members, you've got a different duty of care to young members, particularly those who are under 18. And likewise, if you've got sort of older members of your committees or whatever, and are coming out for a day, you've got to be able to balance that and make sure that everybody can engage and can be involved. But just think about that. Think about that duty of care to both, to all those who are there. And interestingly, or importantly as well, is think about those skills. Have you got skills within your membership that you can use? Have you got people who have got digger experience, or they can use a chainsaw or a strimmer, or they've got a winch, or they can lay bricks or anything like that? If you can use them, and they can use their skills. It can save you a pretty penny in paying to have that done professionally. But use these guys' skills as long as they're competent and they're able to do that effectively in the time you've got. And obviously, going alongside that is, make sure you've got the right kit and materials for the job. There's no point, having 20 people turning up and only having 4 shovels between them and, one slightly blunt saw. You need to make sure you've got the right gear for the job. And again, alongside that, having the right kit, you've also got to make sure people are aware of it and what they're doing. And that's where these risk assessments come in. And we'll touch on that in a bit more detail later on. But risk assessments are important. Make sure people have seen them, have read them, and aware of the risks that you've identified on that task that you're doing. And likewise, you're working on the wind, so you maybe only got a few hours of decent light at this time of year. So let's work within our means. If people if you're going to get going at 9, you have a half an hour for lunch and several coffee breaks and everything else. How long are you actually going to be physically doing that work? And importantly, let's get the priorities right here, and we need to think about having tea and biscuits and making sure people are warm, and a barbecue at the end of the day, or giving them something hot at half time is always a good idea. And then again, the key point in all of this is who's in charge. Who's in charge of your work parties? Is it somebody on your committee who's tasked with your fishery management? And make sure they lead, and make sure those who are returning, those are your volunteers, know that person is in charge and are well aware of that. And you can go down the technical route. There's loads of ways of doing it. This is an example of a management plan I've taken from some of the marine fisheries work. How to manage a fishery. The bottom image is the key part here. Is that stepwise project of where are you now, and where do you want to be? And the intervening bit is how are you going to get there? So you're going to plan for it, you're going to deliver it, you're going to review it, you're going to plan again, and you're going to deliver it again. And again, be aware of the fact that you're not going to get everything done on your fisheries in one winter or in one work party. It's going to take, some of it might take several years. It might take you a long time to get to where you want to be. But you bring people with you, you design that plan, you engage them, and you know how you're going to get there. So be mindful of that as you start to develop your fishery management plans. And I think importantly as well is, keep it simple. Keep it nice and simple. Don't be overcomplicated about it. Work within your means. Remember who you've got and your volunteers you've got at hand, and ensure that people can see where the end goal is here and how you're going to get there. So I'm not going to major on this too long, just to make you aware of some of the key pieces of legislation. And again, I'm sure you're all aware of, the Health and Safety at Work Act. It's a key piece of legislation. You all have it within your workplace. It's often a laminated sheet of A1 or A0 card. It's stuck on the back of a door somewhere in the office or in the canteen or on the back of a filing cabinet somewhere. But really, it's that key piece of primary legislation that we all have to follow. It's criminal law, and it's aimed at protecting both the employees and others who may be affected by our work activities. And the key thing here, the key word there is that employees. And we're going to come back to that word employee, or people who are employed, or people who've got a duty. It is enforced mainly by the Health and Safety Executive, but also local authorities. And the grey area here is generally they don't have the power to investigate incidents if they are purely voluntary. Yeah. So if there's an accident and it's a purely voluntary activity, then the Health and Safety Executive may not, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, want to investigate that. However, there's a few caveats. This doesn't include damage. So if you're working within on a fishery and you accidentally drop a branch on somebody's car, or you cause a nearby field margin to collapse or a fence line to collapse, that's on you. That damage is that can be enforced. If you are a big fishery or a big angling club, sorry, and you have an employee, and you pay a fishery manager, you pay somebody to be a bailiff, and you employ them, then you are liable under the health and safety legislation. So it is then enforced. So it does need a little bit of thinking about as you move forward. But the key thing here is how do we define what a volunteer is? And again, as I mentioned earlier, bit of a grey area, and the grey area here is, and I understand and I appreciate a lot of you will do this, is if you have it written into your club rules or your particular ticket rules that in order to have a specimen ticket or a night permit or a reduction in you offer a reduction in membership fees if you attend 1, 2, 3, 4 work parties, or you've got a ticky box, and it's a depreciating ticket for the number of times you attend a work party. That does and it could be construed as coercion or payment, and then that person is no longer a volunteer. So we do need to just be wary of that. And there's a few bits of legal jargon really in the Home Office Volunteering Code of Good Practice for 2001. A volunteering activity involves spending time unpaid doing something that aims to benefit the environment, as in fisheries, or someone, the angling club, other than or in addition to close relatives, and is undertaken freely and by choice without concern for financial gain. So that idea that you might get discounted rates on tickets could be construed as not being voluntary, because they're not there, and they're there with an ulterior benefit. And I'll just bring that to the Angling Trust on this, and they've done a lot of work. They've got a really good guide to volunteering. So again, in their volunteer guide, which I highly recommend you download and have a read of, the key aspect of volunteer role, they're unpaid without expectation of payment, done with their own free will and choice, with no coercion, for wider social environmental benefit, and at the direction of and on behalf of the organisation, and it's not legally binding. So we need to just as I say, there's that grey area around how could it be construed if you're saying in order to have a ticket you have to attend 1, 2, 3 work parties. That isn't voluntary. That isn't without the expectation of payment. They're getting a benefit from attending. So again, think about how your volunteer activities could be construed if there was that other benefit in there as well. So it brings us around to the other element. So everybody, if you're working, even volunteer organisations, have a duty of care to each other and anybody else who it might affect by their activities. So think about it in as much as if you're a volunteer activity and something was to go wrong, or you had somebody on site using a piece of machinery that they maybe weren't fully trained of, or the machinery was faulty, and there was an incident, volunteers could, yeah, bring a civil lawsuit against, yeah, those people for negligence. However, for that to succeed, the person has to show the defendant had a duty to take reasonable care towards them, and that their injury was suffered as a breach of that duty. So, again, I bring you back to that earlier point about making sure people are aware of the task, what's going on, and things like risk assessments to ensure that everybody has a duty of care. So, if you don't have a risk assessment, your duty of care maybe has gone out the window. If they aren't well versed in what they're doing, their duty of care has gone out the window. If you saw they'd turn the back and they were having a cup of coffee and a chat with a mate when you were talking through the task, and they then get injured because of that, think about that duty of care. Make sure everybody is engaged. Think about how people are moving around sites, and we'll come on to in a second the sort of the key bits about how we can ensure people work safely and things on fisheries. So just again to just reinforce that, volunteers have got to take reasonable care of themselves and others. Follow those instructions and any training they've got. Use the equipment and the PPE they've been given correctly, and ensure that if they identify a hazard or a concern, they report it. If they report it to the person who's in charge, whoever's overseeing that task, that activity on the day, that they have to act on it. And again, it comes back to that duty of care. They don't carry the primary legal duty, but they do have a duty of care to make, and they do have to follow and engage with the health and safety practices that they're being instructed on that day. And if they identify the hazard and they don't report it, and then they become injured by that activity, then the negligence claim maybe wouldn't be withheld. So we do need to think about that, and the volunteers need to be aware of this. And again, there's another piece of legislation is this Management Health and Safety at Work Regs 1999. The key bit of this is around risk assessments and ensuring people have got or have had sight of risk assessments and are aware of those risks. It also shows that there's clear supervision. Again, comes back to the earlier point about making sure somebody's in charge. There's an emergency response, so we've got a clear emergency response if something was to go wrong. People know what the emergency response is. But within this piece of legislation, there's a key term, and that key term is so far as is reasonably practicable. So what that means in reality is those risks have been assessed and they have been reduced as much as is technically possible within both the realms of cost. So it's not overtly costly to that organisation to reduce or remove that risk, or by removing the risk or reducing the risks so far, it makes it impractical to do that task. So we do need to be conscious of this, and it does allow for smaller organisations that cost element can come into play. So you've got your risk assessment, you've identified the risk, you make people aware of it, and you say, we cannot it's technically impossible for us to reduce the risk of us having contractors on site to move aggregates or to lay slabs or to use a chainsaw or to use a strimmer, and we can't. We have to make you aware of that, but it's not technically impossible for us to not do it. So we've gone as far as is reasonably practicable. But the main requirement to you, obviously, is to carry out that risk assessment and ensure, that it's followed. And one of the key bits of this, as well, is about that duty of care for minors. And there's two caveats to this. So the deem anyone under 18 years of age, no matter what they're done before that point, they are deemed as being inexperienced. So any advice and warnings given to them, it has to be so that's a really drilled home. It has to be enforced. They have to be ensured that they've got it. And even that anybody who's under 16 or is still at school, the duty of care is increased again. So we do need, and again, brilliant that we can get kids out and get them involved on fisheries, get them engaged in the improving fisheries and keep them for the future. But we do need to be aware that we have, we've taken that duty of care towards the younger members who are out there, and also within that as well. and you're looking at things like risk assessment, you need to be aware of your volunteers' risk. So that might be making people making you aware of any illnesses they might have if they're diabetic, or if they've got epilepsy, or if they've got musculoskeletal problems, or they've got cardiovascular problems. So you're aware of that. So if anything was to happen and you knew what was going on, you could get that emergency response to them as quickly as possible. I just love AI. Yeah, you've got produce a risk assessment for a fishery on AI, and this is what it comes up with. And I'm not quite sure what this flying thing is at the top up here. That's some sort of electrical tree cutting drone, but yeah, just that's what you sort of get with AI. So do be mindful of that when you're looking at things like this. But so really just wanted to spend a second looking at risk assessments. And I'm sure, again, you've all done these at work, you're all aware of them, you'll have seen them for lots of activities. But really, it's just to reiterate that as well, that point about fairly straightforward. There's lots of templates out there for them. I know an Angling Trust has got a template. I've provided one to them as well. I'll happily send anybody one if they want to see one for fishery operations. Straightforward. Really, it's to allow you to assess the risks, put those precautions in place. And the health and safety executive have these 5 steps to completing a risk assessment. You identify the hazard, decide who might be harmed and how. And I think the key point within number 2 there is looking broader than just who's there on the fishery at that time. We want to look at the general public. We want to look at dog walkers. We want to look at people who might have access to the fishery through public footpaths. We might people who are on horse riders, anybody who might come into contact with us during the day. We need to be looking much wider than just the activity we're doing. We evaluate them and decide on precautions, and again comes back to that point about reasonably practicable. We record them, which is the document, and we review them. And this is the bit a lot of people forget, is that review the assessment. It might be an annual basis, it might be done at one team meeting, one committee meeting each year. We review those risk assessments and how we're going to operate moving forward. Hang on. So we've got there's 2 or 3 different types of risk assessment, but for the benefit of this, we'll look at what a general risk assessment and a site-specific risk assessment. So a site-specific risk assessment applies to each wet party, each site you go to, each fishery. Every fishery is different, has its different risks, different hazards. So we might have a site-specific risk assessment for the various waters. We might have a task-specific risk assessment for an activity that we're doing, and those 2 will sit together. And we might have a general risk assessment for wet parties. Yeah, so that general risk assessment applies to everything. That every wet party that we do, we just have a standard setup for a wet party that sits as the overarching risk assessment. Then within that, we have these site-specific risk assessments for the fisheries, and we might have a task-specific risk assessment for the activity that we're doing on that day. So again, remember, a hazard, anything that may cause harm, and there's numerous things which we'll touch on in a minute. And the risk is that chance, whether they're high or low, that somebody could be harmed by those hazards. And an indication on that document as to how serious that harm could be. So often you'll score them from 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. With 1 being it's a serious injury, and 5 being it's unlikely to happen and it's minor, or it might be a hospitalisation or whatever it might be if the worst was to happen. So we can, again, there's lots of templates out there to help you with producing a risk assessment. But the key thing I would say here as well is that they're reviewed. They are live documents, and treat them as such and update them as you go on. So you may have come across as well this hierarchy of controls, and it's that sort of upside down triangle with the obvious one at the top is we eliminate the risk, and it goes down. We eliminate the risk, that removes it, nobody can be harmed, and it goes all the way down to the least effective element here, which would be to give people PPE, so personal protective equipment that will shield them or protect them from whatever that hazard might be. And this can be, if you've got you're doing a brash removal and you've got to remove a load of brambles, well, you make sure people have got the right gloves to allow them to handle them. It can be as simple as that, or if people are going to be working in the water, that you give them suitable chest waders, and you might want to think about giving them buoyancy aids, or you might want to think about tether lines so that they can't fall off the margins and come to an injury. So there's lots of things we can do. Try and work down. If we can eliminate it, great. If we can't, think about how we can minimize that risk. So things like administrative controls. You just don't allow any lone working. We don't let people work on their own because that increases the risk. So sort to see about how we can minimize that risk and make people aware of it. Just an example, this is one of our risk assessments. We do something really, which on paper seems quite dangerous. We deliver electric fishing training. We do a lot of it. We deliver courses to people, and this is just the front page of a 5-page document around, putting people in water and turning electricity on. You imagine that would be quite a hazardous thing, and it is. So we have quite a comprehensive risk assessment for the activity of electric fishing, a similar one for seine netting, we have a similar one for doing invertebrate samples and all that sort of thing. So, we can share this with you if you want to have a look at it. We're more than happy to share that, and Mark's got the details for doing that. So, again, I'm not spending any time going on this because this list is long and goes on and on. There's lots of things, but obvious ones you might want to put on your risk assessments, and I'll show you another version in a second. Grid references. Where's your access point? National grid reference, great. What 3 words? Good. Yeah, plus on there, where does the emergency vehicles get in? Some of your complexes might have several lakes, 2 or 3 gate entrances. The closest point for an ambulance to get in might not be where you're working, or the easiest point might not be where you're working, it might be somewhere else. So you want to put that on there so people can get in with their emergency vehicles. And then loads of others on there. I won't go through them one by one, but you can sort of see that list of, what we're thinking about. I'm sorry, I've just realized that the image has slid over the bottom. Yeah, immersion risk. You go into a lake, hypothermia is 26 times quicker in water. After the point when you go in and you lose your breath and you're panting to try and get your breath because it's so cold, particularly at the moment. So yeah, be very mindful of that and make sure people are aware of it. And obvious ones, things like mobile phone reception where you are. Even now in 2026, there's mobile black spots. So be mindful and conscious of that as well. Oh, sorry, let's go back on. So this isn't mine. This is an Environment Agency risk assessment and site sheet, and it's brilliant. This is one we do some work with the Environment Agency. This is one of theirs, and they've got a risk assessment on the left-hand side. They've got the contact details for the angling club at the bottom, but then they've also got 2 maps of the site. So where it is at a sort of a macro scale, a big scale on an OS map, and then really drilling down into the detail. Where do they go? What does the site look like? Where do you park? How do you access the site on there as well? So yeah, really, that sort of really granular detail can be quite important when you come to working on sites, particularly remote sites, or particularly where you might want to give this to your volunteers. You email it out to everybody in advance, so they're well versed in of where they're going and what they're doing and at what time. So yeah, just a good example really there for you. And just to show you a few examples from what we've done, you can never be too aware and too conscious of what's going on. Yeah, somebody's stuck in the margins of the river there. Now that's on a training course. We've just stood still talking, and that person slid up to the waist. Yeah, we've had cows approach us. We were reported to the police on a survey course we were doing a few years ago. The police came out to see what we were up to. We was terrible fish poachers. It was a Sunday afternoon, broad daylight, 3:30. There was a dozen of us stood on the bank, and they were we were reported as a gang of fish thieves. Yeah, but well, fair play to the police. They actually did come out and see us. And the bottom picture is we're doing a fish survey on the river, and the stick came in first, and the dog followed the stick. So you never can be too careful of what's who's on the bank and what's flying around when you're working in and around the water. So just a couple of points on this. Again, just because you bought a chainsaw from Aldi, it doesn't suddenly make you a lumberjack. And the same applies to streamers, mechanical winches, people turning up with mechanical pole saws. Anything like that is specialist kit. And if they're going to employ it and you want them to use it, brilliant. They're going to save you a fortune in paying a tree surgeon to come out and do it. However, we need to ensure that when those people turn up with this very specialist kit, that they've got the right gear. They've got the correct PPE, they've got the right certification, they're trained to do it, and you can ensure that there's a safe working area for them to do that. If you've got somebody going out and they're going strimming, they're going to strim through the brambles, going to strim the grass. Think about how the distribution area for those bits of detritus as they strim through it, a rate of knots. We don't want people walking past. It's noisy. It creates a lot of fractured material that can shoot up into people's eyes and can damage people. We don't want people strimming in shorts, that sort of thing. Is people being be conscious and mindful of that when people do turn up. As I say, it really is one of my sort of pet hates when people pitch up and they've got the gear on and the check shirt and a chainsaw and they suddenly think they're in the Canadian Rockies and they're going to start felling some trees. We really need to be aware of that and limit that. And the key piece of legislation that applies to this and any sort of mechanical equipment is what's called the PUREGs, the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations, 1998. And it applies where you've got volunteers who are going to who are offering to use chainsaws, brush cutters, winches, hand tools, as I said, pole saws, that sort of thing. And it applies to the equipment being used and ensures that the equipment is suitable and maintained. And the key bit here is that users are competent and trained. And within that, we've got they can show competence and they can show that they are trained and they have the right certification for that. And if they are using their equipment, that the equipment is sound. That everything works. It's been maintained properly. It's got the right bar size. It's got the right chain tension. It's got the right chain type. It's got the right oil. All of that element within it. So we need to be mindful of that and make sure people are aware. And people don't turn up willy-nilly and start pulling ripcords and getting things fired up. Everything is done with purpose and consciousness of what's being done. Yeah. A few examples of bad practice. I won't say who they are and where they are, but you can sort of see the thing we're talking about here. They've got gloves on, but they aren't wearing a hard hat underneath there. They've got a pair of walking boots on and some waterproof trousers. It's an accident waiting to happen. Cutting water, unstable bankside over a lake. Likewise here, and this is just the picture at the bottom is some comments I took from when we did this a couple of years ago. I don't think hanging by a branch with a chainsaw will be on the agenda. Correct. So just be really, people do it, and then they're not really thinking about it. And the picture at the top there, great. They've got gloves on, they've got hard hat, the visor's up, and the ear defenders are above the head, and they're wearing wellies and a pair of jeans. They're 50% of the way there. But if anything was to happen, where's the duty of care to that volunteer or anybody in the vicinity as well? So again, we just need to be conscious of that. And again, just so you're aware, the things we're talking about. If anybody's on site and they're using any of these machines, particularly chainsaws, we've got 2.5 tree lengths from the nearest person as an exclusion zone. We're aware of ground conditions, wind, sloping ground, rotten branches, uneven land, ground where it's going to fall, anything that might bite back. And if you want some guidance as a minimum, turn it with a work patch with a chainsaw. There's there's two key pieces of training that should have, which are on there: level 2 chainsaw maintenance, cross cutting, and felling small trees up to 380 mil. So there's certification that they can have there. And when you're looking at exclusion zones and tree works, that we've got a safety or an emergency zone of 45 degrees from that tree in 2 directions, so we don't have an accident, so people don't get pinned in if a tree was to fall in an awkward angle. People are able to exclude themselves or escape at 2 points from the tree that's being cut or the branch that's being felled. So be very just be mindful of that. I won't go through it, but there's some guidance here for clubs. You're classed as hobbyists, club members, unless they can demonstrate competency. If you have got a lot of material you want to drop and you want to get it done, get a tree surgeon. Get somebody, put the onus and the risk on them. Get a contractor in. Might cost you 800 quid for a day's work, but if they turn up and they've got all the kit, they can chip everything, they can remove the brash, get it off. Think about that, and use them. It's worth it. It's not even the price of a couple of decent fish, but it's worth it to get the job done safely and effectively in 1 day's work or 2 days' work, and you put all the risk and all the insurance onto them then, and it's not on you. And one other thing to be mindful of when you're looking at, and it doesn't apply just to the use of chainsaws, it applies to your fisheries as well. Look local, look on the local council's website and look for things like called tree preservation orders. You may have some listed trees on there that you cannot interfere with unless they're deemed to be dangerous. So just be mindful of that and have a look before you start, doing any tree works. And then bringing all that just a little bit wider with regards to practical tasks, we want to be conscious of manual handling. If you look at the data on days lost to injury, the vast majority, I forget the figures off the top of my head, but it was like something like 68 to 70% of days lost are lower back lumbar injuries caused through poor handling. So manual handling is really important. And I know everybody's as guilty as the next person. We turn up on a day, we chuck our boots on, we've had a quick slurp of coffee and a biscuit, and we're cracking on. And the next thing you know, you're pulling you're taking out a branch, or you're pulling up an old platform, and your back goes. You're a volunteer. You can't go to work on Monday morning. You're losing revenue. So think about that manual handling importance. Waste removal as well. Yeah, are we having fires? Are we going to chip stuff? Are we leaving piles? How secure is it? So the security is important. We make sure we don't leave anything where people can get injured. We make sure that all the works are completed, are safe and completed on that task. And if we're leaving any works over, we've made sure that we've made them secure so people can't come to injuries from it. And then also in there as well, we want to think about that environmental impact of our work. And there are seasons where we are not allowed to work, which again, I'm sure you're mindful of things like bird nesting season. Have we got bats on site, and are there any areas where they might be hibernating? Are there any active areas in the summer? Think about your amphibians as well. We're not going to go down that idea, these sort of, £1 million bat houses and fish discos and amphibian exclusion zones and all that sort of jazz. But we do need to be aware of that. And then finally, you want that post-project appraisal, don't you? Tell people what they've done. Tell people how successful it was. Report it. Put it in your club newsletters, your handbooks, and make people aware of it. And then just very quickly, just let's have a little look at how we dress and what we do. I suggest you don't turn up looking like Borat, unless you're very particularly brave, particularly this time of year. But he has took his shoes off, so he hasn't he's got some clean footwear to put on. The guys on the right are much better than the than Borat on the left there. But be mindful of that. Make sure people turn up when they come to work parties. They are dressed appropriately. They've got the right kit. Yeah, I always remember when I was lecturing and students to turn up for practicals and they turn up in white tracksuit bottoms and white trainers, and they thought that was appropriate wear for clothing for practicals. It isn't. Make sure you're going to give people the right, they've got the right equipment and the right clothing. And then just on that, and just to stress this point about lone working is dangerous, particularly around water. If you don't think you can manage that, you've got no clear line of sight. You might not have, you might have people working around the other side of a pond, or it's the other side of the road, or it's around you've got no line of sight. You just stop it. Just put it on a risk assessment, no lone working, and remove that risk. If not, buddy system, you make people work in pairs. If they are going to do that, they've got adequate PPE. You've got try and get line of sight to that activity, and even you can think about doing a bespoke lone working risk assessment. But for volunteers, I would really strongly suggest we don't have that, particularly around fisheries. We get people to work together, and we have that buddy system instead. And then just tongue in cheek to show, even though you can be, you're not lone working, you might be the only one who's working. We're all aware of people sitting around watching while we're the ones sweating and breaking our backs, shoveling and what have you. And then just finally around that PPE, think about what you're going to give people. Do you want them to wear life jackets around deeper water? Do you want them to wear buoyancy aids? If they're going to be working close to those margins and they're not going to wear buoyancy aids because it's difficult to wear whilst they're doing that, or life jackets, think about tethers. Can you secure somebody so that if the worst was to happen and they were to have a slip or a fall, they're not going to fall into the water? Particularly important if you're doing work on deep gravel pits or in flowing water. Have a bullet bag. This one on the bottom right there. Get yourself a bullet bag. These are really valuable. You can be trained to use them. The idea is not to knock the person unconscious as you chuck it at them, throw it near them so we can, they can safely grab it and they can be pulled to the bank. And make sure you've got adequate first aid provision for the number of people that you're going to have doing that task on that day. And then just finally, pull it all together. What's the plan? Is everybody aware of what the plan is? Is everybody aware of the risks? You've checked all the equipment, you've checked the PPE, you know who's doing what, where, and when, and your site is secure. You're not going to have members of the public walking through. You're not going to have stray dogs coming onto site. You're not going to have people on horseback walking through a site. So be aware of that, and that pull all that together. Get all this in place before you start the day, and you'll have a really safe and effective work party. And I'm sure you'll be able to, you'll get a lot done, and it'll be for the benefit of your fisheries. And I'm conscious of time, but I think that is me, Mark.
That's fantastic, Paul. Really great. Loads of really useful information there. I think from my experience, I think it's important that somebody really takes command of a work party. That you have an individual that is going to be the person to pull out a clipboard and a pen in front of all the guys and girls. And again, my experience has found that if the club appoint a water management type individual or head bailiff to control and run these things, that individual really has that respect of the others, and you can make them sit up and listen. And that person also is the one that's perhaps highly tuned into what's happening and has that high level of concentration throughout the whole of the event. These things often don't go on for more than about half a day, and I think it is so important just to have yourself really tuned into what's happening for that period where other people are under your responsibility. There were a few questions came in here. We've got 9. What do you want to do? Run through, whiz through a few of those?
I can see the questions on here. I think what I would there's a few questions about what the for volunteers and that great. I would suggest we send out the Angling Trust Guide to Volunteering.
Yeah, that's no problem. I can share that with everyone that's registered. Yeah,
that would give them a good background into that volunteer. As I say, it is that real grey area around what do we class as being a volunteer and what do we class as being payment for service. I think that bit around, I can see a few questions here. We require new members to take part in at least one work party. They're not, if they're a new member and they've paid the full fees, that's not payment for service. That's not coercion. That's just an expectation of membership. Yeah. The grey area comes around that part of where you pay you get a reduction in or a benefit from being at an event.
Yeah. There are lots here, and anybody registered for this event now listening in, there are loads of resources on the Angling Trust website if anybody needs a blank risk assessment. This is being recorded, and this will be uploaded to the Angling Trust Forums YouTube channel as well. So if you feel like we've skipped past anything, you want to go back to any of Paul's slides, you'll be able to do that, within a day or two. I'll get that uploaded. So you're going to answer a few of the questions, are you?
I'll answer a few questions on
Mark.
I'll tap in while Mark does the...
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so next up with the presentation is Mark Owen, Head of Fisheries at the Angling Trust. Thanks, Mark. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll just cover Paul Sparks' question in the Q&A on what happened with BAA. My understanding is that, no, it wasn't prosecuted by the HSE. It was a local authority that did that. And off the top of my head, the findings were around the fact that no safety zone had been established for the volunteers to be in a safe place when they were not doing the work. And also, I think I recall that there was a question about the experience and qualifications of the manager of the work party at the time to be able to carry it out. But it's a while since I've looked at that, but I'm certainly definite that it was the local authority that prosecuted as opposed to HSE.
Yeah, I think didn't the person who unfortunately was killed, he'd gone for a break, and there was no exclusions.
Sat down to have a break. He was wearing head protection, but he took it off.
That's right.
And that tragically was when a branch came down on that. Let me see if I can share my screen this time. Had some difficulties earlier.
Yeah.
There we go. So evening, everyone. Nice to see so many people attending this evening, and I can see some familiar names. Welcome. If I'm not my usual exuberant self, it's because unfortunately I'm down with flu at the moment. But bear with me whilst we struggle through. I'm going to cover planning and delivering your facilities project. There's some common themes from what Paul's just been talking about. And I particularly want to stress the need for record taking and a paper trail. Paul's talked about risk assessments, etc., and the requirement for you to keep those. And I'll talk a bit more on different aspects in this part. But the reason why we talk about ensuring that you've got a paper trail is in case things go wrong. So if you've got all your risk assessments, all your plans in place, and you keep them, and something goes wrong, that forms part of your defence if anything happens. It also would form part of any disagreements with contractors that you don't feel has done the work properly. You've got an evidence trail there to show what was expected, what was agreed, to help with that sort of dispute mechanism. So as Paul said, my name's Owen and I'm head of fisheries at the Angling Trust. I have been a club secretary. I have been a club committee member. I know what it's like. I've organised work parties, volunteered. Yes, I have been halfway up a tree in chest waders and a chainsaw cutting branches down. Subsequently, my only safety calculation was how deep was the river below me to cushion my fall. Subsequently, I filled a light. I did a degree in environmental management, and a third year module was environment and industrial risk assessment. So that is why I'm giving this talk this evening. It is similar to a talk I gave a few years ago. I don't apologise for that because it's all still relevant, and this will be up on the website. So project guidance, all sorts of different projects that we as fishing clubs, fisheries do carry out. It requires different levels of skills, health and safety requirements. You can see some of the projects in the pictures below, but all construction related work must be developed and carried out in accordance with the Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015. That is all construction work. There are details which I'll come to later of where you would have to report to HSE on a particular construction project, but I'll cover that later. But the important thing is all construction related work. So we will identify best practice for project delivery and the requirements that are needed. 5 main steps to consider: planning and budget. A bit of a no-brainer, that one. What's the extent of work we can afford? When we would like the work to be completed? Paul's already said, keep it simple. It might take 2-3 years or whatever to complete a project, but keep it simple and don't expect to do everything in a week. Produce a detailed description of the work in writing, including sketches. That all forms part of the scope of work so that you're clear what you want to do, and also others involved, whether that be committee members or whatever, are clear on what the plan is. Choosing a contractor, you need to check them. I'll come to this again later, but you do really need to check that the contractor can do what he or she promises to do and they're qualified to do it. Decide who's going to manage the work with regard to safety, quality and programme. That comes back to a discussion we had a bit earlier. And care and maintenance. Once a project is finished, you will, regardless of project, need to maintain it and ensure that you can afford to maintain it. So in more detail, planning and budget. That's up to you to come up with, but it would be a good idea to engage with a contractor to discuss likely costs, indicative costs, informal discussions that are not binding as part of your plan to start with. And the timescale of your project needs to be practical and achievable, and ensure that the contractor has sufficient time to manage the project safely. We're working mostly in water. We are very much at the whim of the weather. If you look at this year, for example, we've had the driest spring on record, we've had the hottest summer on record, and we've had wettest autumn on record. So you need to make sure that those ground conditions are safe and that the timetables are practical. I know pandemic's over, but the lead time for delivery and purchase of materials is still relevant. We have certain people daily putting tariffs on various materials and then taking them off again. And that all, because a lot of this, the steel, the wood, may well be coming from different countries. You need to make sure that those delivery terms and additional costs can be planned in, and speak to your contractor about that. Ensure the access to site is available during the programme. We've touched on this with Paul's presentation, but ensure that any footpaths, roadways, private or public, can be rerouted around the construction area. That access to the construction site is restricted to the works teams only, and not the public or horse riders or whatever. And a safety zone must be created around the work site to restrict access. This may well need consultation with your local authority, particularly if it's a public footpath, for it to be rerouted. We have, under the Angling Improvement Fund, when we've given out otter funding for otter fences, we have had issues when the club has suddenly realised that actually they can't reroute the public footpath, or they can't get permission from the local authority, and the projects had to be canned. There needs to be a detailed description of what is to be constructed, with sketches, photographs, etc. Consult with your contractor, because they have options of design and technical requirements that be different and more effective than you would come up with, and a clear indication of the position on the sites on the site. I have had a situation where a club wanted to do a project. They got a contractor in. They produced a map and explained on the map where the project was going to be. Contractor went and did a quote on somewhere completely different, and it wasn't applicable. But also what a contractor needs from you: clear idea of your requirement, good, clear communications between the two of you, and that's where the scope of works comes in. And this is key to a successful project. Site-specific conditions. You must inform the contractor of any site conditions that may affect working methods or may be a hazard. These are things that you should know really on your site and your fishery, and it's not something that a contractor would easily be able to find out without your guidance. Payment. Again, this depends on the size of the project that we're talking about. Some contractors, particularly small ones, like a mobilisation payment to fund materials up front, and then stage payments afterwards. I would personally not recommend getting involved in a mobilisation payment scheme. You should be choosing contractors that have the cash flow to be able to cover this themselves without requiring that from you. It's an indication, I think, of perhaps a contractor that's not fit for purpose. If you're going to do stage payments, you must agree in writing at what stage you'll be doing stage payments, and clear with the contractor and in writing what conditions and what stage of the project it will be done. And you should ensure, if you're going to do this, that you have inspected at that stage to ensure that it's done correctly and as you're expected. Duty holders, you must inform the contractor or anyone else involved with the works of design or groundworks. If you have described the works yourself under CDM regs, you're designated as a designer, and you must inform the contractor of that. Contractors will often need a site visit. I would say you should always have a site visit ahead of providing a quotation. And as it says, it's a good opportunity to meet and build a relationship. Appointing duty holders, this is what you must do. Appointing a contractor or designer, you have a responsibility to take reasonable steps. We've come across the word reasonable or unreasonable, haven't we, in the earlier presentation, to appoint contractors or designers that have suitable experience, skills and knowledge to carry out the work in a secures health and safety. This is the next bit, is where you would have to inform under CDM regs, HSE. So it's notifiable if it falls into the criteria that the project will, I quote, last longer than 30 days and have 20 workers simultaneously at any point in the project, or if the project is to last more than 500 days. I would suggest for the average angling club and fishery, this would be out of scope. But it's worth bearing in mind that it's a legal requirement to notify the HSE should it do so. Pre-construction information, again, this is all about the condition of the land, the ground, what's hidden under the ground, what's whether there's asbestos in any works to be demolished. All that should be noted in the scoping and informed to the contractor. What contractors must provide to you is a clear bid submission. It must have everything that you've requested or a reason why not, which you must discuss with the contractor. And they must confirm the timescale of the works. There must be a written plan explaining how health and safety will be managed throughout the project. I have seen, I also am a judge with the Angling Improvement Funds, which is for otter fencing, predation, biosecurity, etc. I quite see a wording in the application that the applicant feels that because they've got a contractor in, they can wash their hands of all health and safety requirements. You can't. It's your responsibility to check. The contractor must provide you with suitable evidence of their capability and competence. And it would be good practice to, if you can, look at previous work that's been completed and get a feel for the competence and capabilities of the contractor. And if in doubt, as I said, see examples of previous works, have a look at the website. In these days of AI, I'm not convinced that just looking at a website is a good option. I think you should have more in-depth investigations of the competency. Insurance, ensure, and this means see, that the contractors are fully insured. As a general rule, we would expect £10 million employers' liability insurance, £10 million public liability insurance, £1 million professional indemnity insurance. And again, Paul has talked about the requirement for certificates for special operational employees, whether that is driving a dumper truck, using a chainsaw. You do need to see these certificates, and you're not just being told we are certified. You should see those certificates and make sure that they're up to date for the staff that are being used on site. Cost. And again, we look at this through grants with the Angling Improvement Fund. Just because it's cheap or the cheapest bid doesn't mean it's the best bid. We should be looking at best value for the project as a whole, as opposed to just getting the cheapest quote. And most grant giving bodies will take that into account. This is just some accreditations to look out for. Managing the works, step 4. Make suitable arrangements for managing the project. Ensure that the steps are taken to make sure that the works safely, that there's a safe system of work in place described in their construction plan, and you must be confident that the contractor is compliant and the plan is suitable once the works have commenced. Reporting dangerous conditions. Everyone has a duty to report dangerous conditions that might be encountered on site. So, and also in advance. So if you're aware that all of a sudden there's been a freeze, the conditions on the ground aren't suitable, you must notify the contractor immediately so that it can be stopped ahead of time. And the contractor must develop suitable risk assessments within their construction methods and take into account the site hazards that you may have made them aware of. And as I said, we've said before, as a last resort, PPE and what PPE will be worn in particular circumstances. This is just sort of people that you would encounter. A contracts manager is usually the person you would have the initial discussions with, who would provide the quotes. They won't necessarily be the person that will be leading the work on the ground. Could be, but it may not be. That would be the team leader or project supervisor, and that would be on site supervising the works are being carried out. And then the operational staff that are actually doing the work on the ground. Snagging and handover, probably the most important phase for you in managing a contract. This is when it's been complete and the contractor has said to you, it is, we've completed everything. It's important that you have a walk around and inspection with the contracts manager to ensure that all the project requirements have been completed as quoted for. Is it a good standard, and have the agreed materials being used? I'm not suggesting for a minute a contractor might substitute cheaper materials than what's been quoted, but you need to check it. Has it been left in a clean and tidy manner? Is it safe and ready to be used? And has the contractor provided you with the drawings and information so that you have a record of it? And equally important is aftercare, care and maintenance. There's no project that doesn't require maintenance after it's been completed, whether that is being fishing pegs, whether it is otter fencing or whatever. So you should have a maintenance plan and maintenance information from the contractor so that you can form that care and maintenance plan afterwards. If it is otter fencing, we have guidance on the website about that. Please do not use streamers close to an otter fence. It drives Jake and Richard bananas when they have to attend where otters have broken into a fishery and they find that it's streamers that have opened up the wire, cut the wire at ground level that's caused it. So I'll go back to designer. Designer, if you recall, is specifically mentioned in CDM regs. You may decide it doesn't need a designer, but the simplest works will require an element of design. You're responsible for appointing suitable duty holders, which includes the designer. You may find, and Paul said this, and it's a very, very good point, the best projects I probably have seen that clubs have completed themselves, it's where they've identified skill sets within their membership that fills the requirement that they need to do the work, whether that's builders, whether that's tree surgeons, whether it is whatever. And they've been brilliant projects because obviously that fishing club member has a passion for this, not only for the work, but also for the fishery. So it's ensuring or trying to make best use of your membership with their skills. Health and safety file. Again, this is simple but invaluable. You need to keep on file, as I've said before, your risk assessments, all the information make sure that you keep it, it's kept in a safe place, future reference, so that if anything goes wrong, you've got that paper trail and you've got that evidence. Environment consents and planning. So we're working in water, we're working with fish, we're working with animals, we're working with birds, because they're all out there. Now, you will have heard a lot of talk from the government about endangered species getting in the way of housing projects, although I understand they've never actually been able to actually give an example of that, but there you go. But we're working at the moment under present legislation, so we have to take it into account. And whilst we're talking here about European protected species under Habitats Directive, etc., which is transposed over into UK law, that legislation is underpinned by international agreements that we have under, for example, the Berne Convention, which is wider than just the European Union. It's a good, and it's always a good, before you start a project, talk to your Environment Agency fisheries officer, because they may well be aware of species or issues that you're not in the vicinity and what needs to be taken into account. I, for example, when I did a project on a fishing club, always engaged with the Environment Agency fisheries officers, and they actually very kindly did things like bat surveys for me for nothing, because I'd built up a fantastic relationship with them and they wanted to see the projects work. If you don't know who your local EA fisheries officers are, we can provide you the details or a phone number for you to contact. And yes, there are issues around licensing and times of year. If you have white-clawed crayfish, for example, then you'd be restricted to certain months of the year in which you can do work. And then we also should not be doing work that would disturb birds during the breeding season. TPOs, Paul has also talked about. Don't forget there are limits on how much you can actually fell yourself without having a license from the Forestry Commission. Those details are there and will be on the website. You need to check those to make sure that you're not breaching Forestry Commission licensing requirements. And some of you will be working in sites which are sites of special scientific interest. That is, there will be restrictions on work that can be done. It may not affect you. It may not. But you can always speak to your Natural England officer, or if you look on the website, you can. There is detail for each SSSI work that can be done and can't be done without Natural England approval. But I've always found them helpful when asking them directly. And then planning permission for structures. Again, failure to comply, and I think I've seen a couple of examples recently where people have not complied with planning permissions and they've had to remove the structures that they paid for. It's always good to use the best materials that you can. Recycle plastic, apart from the fact that it's a good thing, and you can actually get recycled plastic these days from recycled fishing lines through the National Line Recycling Scheme. But they're rot resistant, and they'll last a lot longer than wood. Anti-slip grip boards, again, says it in the title, anti-slip. That helps you with your ensuring that your anglers are safe. And you can do hybrid constructions. One thing that we regularly pick up on surveys of the angling community is one of their top requirements is toilets on site. So you might consider a composting toilet because it doesn't require mains or running water. It's low maintenance, and it helps making your fishery an attractive place for people to go fishing. Ensure the contractor is supplying British standard material throughout works. With footpaths, there is always a risk of transporting invasive non-native species. We have grants available for biosecurity plans and washdown facilities. It's all advertised on our website, which will help with this. And we also have best practice and guidance on the website on invasive non-native species. With regards to installation and camber, you can see there a diagram and a photograph of a path that's been installed in good condition. So I mentioned maintenance before. And can you do your maintenance required with your local members, local volunteers, club members, work parties, or is it a bigger job than that? Do you need constructor engagement as well? I said at the offset, you need to make sure that you have the funding available for whatever maintenance is required, and that maintenance needs to be appropriate to the project that you've done. So with otter fencing, for example, we recommend that these are inspected at least weekly to ensure that holes and branches falling on fences hasn't occurred. And that's it from me. Good luck on your next project. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. That's terrific, very thorough. Yeah, I think a couple of points from me there. As a club and fishery support officer visited and discussing various points with clubs over the Midlands, is to take the project seriously and have a paper trail and open a file. And the more information and documents and quotations, and the more organised you are, particularly in terms of acquiring funding, it puts you on the right track straight away with your application and the amount of information you can put down, which ultimately helps with your score. And also another instance of a peculiar crossover is something I've come across, where you have a legitimate contractor or worker, landscaper, machine operator who is insured, who has all the liability cover and everything that's necessary, but then turns up on site to do a project for the angling club on a bit of a casual basis. And I think it's very important for the club, even if he's a long-term member and has done work before, I think it is important to establish who is he there on the day as a representative of A and B diggers and machinery, or is he just turning up as Frank Smith and doing a bit of work, and provide some clarity as to who's covered on the day. We have a few questions left on the board. Thanks, Paul, in the background. You've hammered about all the questions out there. That's terrific. I will produce a Q&A document, so all the questions will be documented, all the answers to the questions will be documented, and that more likely will accompany the recording, if I can. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to find a way of dropping that into the comments section of the recording on our YouTube channel. So a couple coming from the top here, Michael Patterson. Hi, Michael. Volunteering is key. I think this is more of a statement. Volunteering is key. Also identifies if an organisation is not for profit, and ensures people don't do things they're not competent to do, which is that's a fair comment, isn't it? Michael, again, you need to remember that PPE is a last resort. If it fails, it usually results in an injury. Yeah, fair statement. Absolutely. Richard King. Hi, Richard. What about liability insurance for fisheries with paying members? Either of you want to take that one on? What about liability insurance for fishery?
Not sure with paying members. I mean, with the Angling Trust insurance, that includes liability insurance, if that answers your question, Rich. Dale, I can see you're asking me about the minimum requirements of training to drive a 360 mini digger. I would have to look that up, mate.
Yeah, I think just go back to the public liability insurance. Most fisheries would need that, whether you've got day tickets or members anyway, just to cover for people being on that site. And also, I think with the insurance, it's to cover for other people on that site. Yeah, even if you're members of the public, if they're wandering around or whatever it might be. So it's best practice to have that insurance in place.
Yeah, I think any member of the public on site anyway, that insurance is non-negotiable, isn't
Yeah,
it? I think
absolutely.
a legal requirement. I mean, look at the
Yeah.
Angling Trust coaches. You know, they've got that £5 million liability insurance just for coaching. Okay, one. With compulsory or PT or work parties, if the club has taken reasonable care and prepared thorough risk assessments which have been followed, is the AT liability insurance valid? Nick Drayton. With compulsory or PT work parties.
Yeah. Okay. So if you've done, I think Paul and I worded this quite carefully. If you've done all that's reasonably required, we couldn't. That's the best we can say. It would be down to the insurance company on the particular incident. We can't speak on behalf of the insurance company. You will see the guidance there for what is reasonable, practical. So I can't 100% guarantee that.
Fair enough. And a couple from Dale. Hi, Dale. Nice to see you. So 500, I think he's on about the work. So that will be 500 person days mark, say 50 people planting trees for 10 days would need to be notified. I think that's following up from another question here.
Regarding to remote grass cutters, Dale, I have seen these. Actually, a friend of mine has one to control grass on a steep bank, and it seems to work quite well. It's solar powered as well, from what I remember.
I've seen these at one of the internal drainage board days. I think the IDB is internal drainage boards and the EA operation delivery teams are using them now as in like gang mowers for cutting, just exactly as Dale sets out there, the steep banks and even banks, particularly along things like flood banks and drains. So you can get some serious bits of kit now, and you'll be surprised, like you said, Mark. You know, the sort of the steepness of the banks they can actually work in. You think they just go straight over and they'd never be seen again, but they do tend to be fairly robust bits of kit.
Okay. And there's just one remaining. Michael Patterson again. Fortunately, as a small club, we have the NBUSH qualified personnel and competent project managers. All right,
that's what you're looking for. If you've got somebody in your team who's got NBUSH certification, then you lean on them. That's what comes right back to that big bit that both Mark and I have said. If you've got somebody within your committee or your membership who's got this IOSH or NBUSH or any sort of project management, then lean on them to. Yeah, it might cost you a case of beer, a couple of bottles of wine, but it'll be worth it in the long run.
Fantastic. Likewise, if anybody, once this closes, anybody suddenly then thinks of a question, drop me an email, mark.edgerton@anglingtrust.net, and I'll fish it out and make sure we get you the answer to it. And Michael's just popped one up there. Fortunate to gain the herbicide training through the funding at the Angling Trust. That's good to hear as well. Yeah, fantastic. That's great. I think we've covered everything there. All the slides, all the information, all the questions answered. Unless you chaps have anything else to add, or I'll just hang on in case anybody thinks of another 30 seconds if anybody thinks of any other questions.
I say if anybody does have any questions, anything they want, you say Matt, but my email address is at the end there. You can get in touch with me directly, and Max was there as well. And you've got obviously both Max who can answer questions or pass them on. But yeah, anybody's got anything they want to know specifically, say we can always, if we don't know the answer, we can point you in the right direction.
Yeah. We've, my role as a club and fishery support officer, there are 3 other people doing that role as well. In the UK, we've got a northern officer, one in the southwest, one in London, myself covering the Midlands. So, more than happy to pop out and give some face-to-face advice as well if anybody needs it.
I think we've got the northern one on the call. I've seen
Right, there's one in there. Surprised you hadn't asked a question. Oh, very good session. Thank you all. Oh, thanks, Alan. Very informative. Here we go. We'll just hang on while all the praise comes in.
Ian's realised he's
say,
being watched.
He's woken up.
Yeah.
AT Funding has helped the club with training for strimmers, spraying and chainsaw use. That's Alan Whittingham, Bollingham Burke in Fly Fishers. And hi, Alan. Fantastic. Thank you all. Eric Prescott. Thanks, Eric. Peter Openshaw. Thank you. Cheers, guys. Yeah, looks like everybody's sort of closing.
Joining, Eric. For those aren't aware, Eric is the Angling Trust chair. Nice to see you.
I thought I recognised the name.
Perhaps a round of funding to pay for risk assessment, training, machine use, etc., would be useful. Perhaps, yeah, something to consider. Very insightful, great clarity. Thanks for your time, gents. Much appreciated. Terrific. All positive. That's good. My first time hosting. No mistakes. No IT glitches. Thanks very much, everybody. I'll call it tonight. Thanks for your help, Mark and Paul, and I'll see you at the next one.
No, cheers, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.